Good day to all of you. I'm deeply grateful to be able to connect with you through the wonders of technology. My hope is that you are all doing well, keeping safe, and enjoying good health. I wish to give special thanks to Father Aaron and the staff at Resurrection for this opportunity, and to my son-in-law Corey Cross for his creativity and his tech savvy in producing this video, and to my family who are serving as my audience for this recording and who will be leading the reflections at the conclusion of my talk. Here in Southern Oregon, we are currently surrounded by dense smoke and hazardous air quality, so I will need your understanding if my voice gets a little ragged. The presentation has 3 parts, which will be approximately 20 minutes in length. This will allow you to have a little break after each part if you so wish. After you view the video, if you have questions or if you would like more information, please email your questions and requests to me by November 1st. Based on your questions and your requests, I will prepare another presentation for a future date. The time in which we find ourselves has prompted me to prepare this presentation, which I call From Separation to Unity, a journey from the split into us and them to the unity of you are that, a phrase that will become meaningful later in this presentation. We live in a difficult and challenging time. Devastating fires have been raging. A pandemic has invaded our world. It is not surprising that the COVID virus has fostered the return to popularity of a novel written in 1948, The Plague by Albert Camus. In the midst of this pandemic, I picked up and did my annual reread of The Plague. This novel has been my favorite book for nearly 50 years, and it enervated my spirit again as the COVID virus raged. The reader can find multiple parallels between the novel and our present time. The main character in the novel, Dr. Rue, faces the inevitability of plague as the number of rats multiplies and some of his patients show unmistakable symptoms of a virus. Other characters in the novel display a variety of responses to the possibility of plague. See if these responses sound familiar. Some deny the plague. Others see it as divine punishment. One person calmly agrees that it was time for the plague. Another person tries to bribe his way out of town. And still another keeps a daily account of the activities in the town. A few lose themselves in various pleasures, and others go to church more frequently. Dr. Rue, however, like so many folks in our present-day pandemic, takes the reality of the plague seriously, and he chooses to be on the front line. He makes his patient rounds every day, holds consultations with his fellow doctors about possible treatment for plague victims, pleads with the town prefect to order serious health warnings, and works tirelessly to bring relief and comfort. And when the plague finally subsides, Dr. Rue resolves to compile the story to bear witness to the plague victims so that some memorial to them might endure. He also wishes to state that he has come to realize that what we learn in a time of pestilence is that there are more things to admire in human nature than to despise. At the close of the novel, the reader comes to this statement, which has seared my soul ever since the first time I read it. Nonetheless, he knew that the tale he had to tell could not be one of a final victory. It could be only the record of what had to be done and what assuredly would have to be done again in the never-ending fight against terror and its relentless onslaughts by all who, refusing to bow down to pestilences, strive their utmost to be healers. For me, this line cuts through all the controversy, all the different attitudes, not only about dealing with COVID, but with political and cultural differences that divide us. It comes down simply to this: striving to be a healer. Amidst the fear and anger, striving to be a healer. Amidst the isolation, striving to be a healer. Amidst sorrow, anxiety, and utter fatigue, striving to be a healer. The COVID pandemic allows us to see firsthand that we are all in the same boat, and the only thing that makes any sense is to care for one another. I would also like to emphasize another line in that Camus quotation. It could only be the record of what had had to be done and what assuredly would have to be done again in the never-ending fight against terror and its relentless onslaughts. The plague will be back. The COVID virus or a similar pandemic will be back. Painful times will be back, right? What matters is that we continue over and over and over again to refuse to bow down to pestilence and to strive our utmost to be healers. The Plague by Albert Camus and our own experience of the COVID virus makes us keenly aware of the two situations I will be speaking about today: separation and unity. Brian Stevenson says in his book, Just Mercy, that it is distance, separation, physical, social, and spiritual, that allows injustice to flourish. Jan Phillips, in No Ordinary Time, says this about our situation: talking about us and them like our lives aren't intertwined is archaic. Thinking our own religion or political party or nation has all the right answers is foolhardy and arrogant. Our problems are rooted in the notion of separateness, while our solutions are suspended in the field of unity. Besides the pandemic, our world is severely fractured from violence, war, famine, abuse, and poverty. We are separated into us and them by color, culture, political position, and wealth. White supremacy, immigration, prejudice further divide us into us and them. Finger-pointing and name-calling spur the separation. No doubt you could add other matters that divide us. Looking back, we see that the human condition has been continuously beset by bigotry, ignorance, greed, and discrimination. But it has also been rescued from the brink of chaos by the sane and balanced response of individuals and groups dedicated to a life that is inclusive and interconnected. The veil of separation has the possibility of parting, and the reality of interconnection is apparent to all who are willing to see. The COVID virus has given us the pause and isolation necessary for us to see how much we need one another. Has this been your experience? The pandemic, hopefully, has taught us that we are profoundly interconnected. Centuries ago, wise persons in the midst of violence and chaos came to this same conclusion. We are interconnected. It is time for a resurgence of the insights of these ancestors. First, we'll look at our ancestors in Israel to see how they struggled for unity, fell into separation, and then with the teaching of Jesus, learned the way to shed the separation of us and them. Following their slavery in Egypt, a tradition grew in Israel called the Exodus tradition. This tradition established the people as Yahweh's people, brought out of slavery into freedom, into their own land, a people bound by covenant to Yahweh, a covenant binding them to care for each other, to take special care of those in need, the poor, the widows, orphans, even aliens, because as they were reminded, they were once aliens in a foreign land. There was to be no us and them. This is the Exodus tradition, and the word Exodus names one of the biggest metaphors in Scripture, journeying from bondage to freedom. A journey our ancestors made many times, and we too make in our lives. You likely have stories of your own experience of Exodus, of leaving a kind of bondage to find freedom. Once settled in their own land, the Israelites built a temple, and another tradition took root, the priestly tradition. Gradually dominating Israel's religion, the priestly tradition suppressed the Exodus tradition. Laws of holiness abounded, a hierarchy rose, a power structure emerged, and the people, once regarding themselves as a people brought from slavery to freedom, were now caught in the new slavery of the purity system. The law became the only teacher. Division into us and them became the norm. The Hebrew prophets tried desperately, but mostly unsuccessfully, to revive the Exodus tradition, especially the covenant law binding the people to care for the most vulnerable. The prophets were focused on justice and righteousness. For them, righteousness meant God's saving activity, God bringing together all the created order. They believed that God's goal for the cosmos is shalom, peace, wholeness. God's righteousness is God's shalom-making activity. And bound to Yahweh by the covenant, Israel was supposed to share in that activity. Righteousness, shalom, meant compassion for widows and orphans. Righteousness demanded benevolence, kindness, generosity. Shalom meant a burning compassion for the oppressed. The prophet's preoccupation with justice had its roots in a powerful awareness of injustice. That justice is a good thing, a fine goal, even a supreme ideal, is commonly accepted. What in the view of the prophets was lacking was a sense of the monstrosity of injustice. The distinction of the prophets was in their remorseless unveiling of injustice and oppression, which resulted in the separation of society into us and them. The true measure of commitment to justice, says Brian Stevenson, cannot be measured by how we treat the rich, the powerful, the privileged, and the respected. The true measure is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. In the Hebrew scriptures, the priestly tradition taught that holiness was the most essential quality of God and therefore of the Israelite people. And this holiness became defined in terms of separation from anything perceived as unholy or impure, such as sickness, death, and deviant behavior. Jesus faced this temple system and saw it as dehumanizing, oppressive, and abusive. He and his disciples did not surround themselves with the walls of purity laws, frequent fasting, going through elaborate rituals of cleansing before meals, strictly observing all the laws about the Sabbath, eating only with those who strictly observed the purity laws. Jesus disturbed and challenged this system of purity and exclusivity. Like Jesus, have you been in situations when you have felt the need to challenge the system? Rather than excluding those deemed impure, Jesus welcomed them, healing the sick, even on the Sabbath, eating with people labeled as sinners, and going into unholy territory such as Samaria. As a poor man himself, and as an outcast revealed in the expression of the so-called holy ones, can anything good come from Nazareth? Jesus welcomed the poor and the outcast. Jesus saw through their eyes and challenged his disciples and us to see through the eyes of the poor, the oppressed, and the vulnerable. In the story of Jesus' crucifixion in the Gospel of Mark, the evangelist proclaims one of the most earth-shaking declarations in the whole Gospel. The veil of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, there's no historical record of the veil in the sanctuary being torn in two from top to bottom. Mark is obviously speaking metaphorically, not literally here. What did the veil in the sanctuary represent? The temple was built on a series of separations. Separation of the least holy from the most holy. The outermost court was for women. The first inner court for men. The further inner courts for scribes and temple officials. Then the court of the priests. And lastly, the sanctuary, in front of which hung the veil, separating everyone from the Holy of Holies, except for the high priest who could enter once a year. When Mark proclaimed that the veil of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom, he was proclaiming that this whole temple system, this purity system, was over. Jesus had freed people from the shackles of the exclusive purity system. It was over. Mark is proclaiming the meaning of the gospel, the meaning of Jesus' teaching. No more us and them. All are welcome. All belong. All are one. Today, we will journey from separateness to unity in the company of our wise ancestors. We will see how these ancestors saw, practiced, and taught an alternative to us and them. Before we begin this journey, however, I would like to lay out two mental pictures from Scripture, which hopefully can make the importance of interconnectedness more vivid, the importance of moving from us and them to unity. The first Scripture picture comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9. A crowd, a large crowd, is following Jesus, and they come to a deserted place. There are lepers, paralytics, sick people, prostitutes, tax collectors, and many others who have been excluded from Judaism because they are labeled sinners. Jesus looks over the gathering and welcomes them. He tells them, "You belong. You are blessed. You are beloved." He touches them and brings them healing and hope. As the day wears on, the disciples are concerned. They only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and the people must be hungry. Jesus simply blesses the loaves and fish and begins to distribute them. the collection of these so-called outsiders and sinners maybe have a little food, maybe stashed in the folds of their robes, but they pull out what they have and share it so that everyone gets something. Can you picture this scene? This scripture passage leads us from separation to unity. A crowd of seemingly unconnected folks seeing themselves as outcasts, hungry for hope and healing and bread, listen to Jesus telling them they belong, that they are blessed and beloved. They feel his compassion and his healing touch and see how he cares for each of them. When they see that he's even willing to share the little bread he has, they look around and see those around them as ones like themselves, connected by their common humanity. They reach into folds of their garments and share what they have. They move from separateness to unity. The second scripture passage comes from Ezekiel, chapter 37. The prophet has accompanied the Israelite people into exile in Babylon in 587 before the Christian era. The people feel defeated and hopeless, scattered and unconnected from their homeland. Ezekiel feels their pain and seeks to bring them comfort and hope. He has an amazing experience that gives him every reason to hope for a better future. Ezekiel has a vision in which he looks over a vast, barren field covered in bones. How dry they were. In the midst of the barrenness and the dryness and the hopelessness, he hears the question, can these bones live? At first, he has no answer to this seemingly absurd question. Then he allows himself to imagine the bones coming to life. He prays for the Spirit to come and enliven the bones. From the four winds, come, O Spirit, and breathe into these slain that they may come to life. In his vision, the bones come together, covered with sinews and flesh, and they stand up, a great army. Ezekiel realizes that his vision is really about his people, whose hopes have been dried up and scattered. He goes to his people confident with his new message. You will recover. You can be whole. Hearing the prophet's message, the Israelites face the reality of their captivity and yet take hope. Following the advice of Ezekiel, they make a change, giving up their despair and resentment of their captors and choosing instead to put their energies into strengthening each other and caring for each other. The story of Ezekiel's vision vividly portrays the movement from being scattered like dry bones to being gathered together, made whole. The movement of transformation from separateness to connectedness, from us and them to unity. May we, like Ezekiel, believe that dry bones can live.